Gravel Locos came to Colorado last weekend, and I was down there in Pueblo to have a good time and to test out the new Litespeed Ultimate G2 gravel race bike. The course in the high desert west of Pueblo was a good test for the titanium bike and the Spinergy wheels with their PBO spokes. There was some 8,000 vertical feet of climbing and a fair amount of washboard. The event brought out a healthy smattering of pros, from Allison Tetrick to Emily Newsom, Justin Martin, Keo Reinen, Alex Howes, Ian Boswell, and of course Lawrence Tyndam. Plus there was the 150-mile race winners Russell Finsterwald and Flavia Oliveira, plus Laura and Ted King, who won the 100-mile race. And then there were plenty of other chuckleheads like me out there. The Gravel Locos format is somewhat unique in that it's a fundraiser for local volunteer firefighter departments. That was the case in the original race in Texas, and Fabian brought that formula forward to Pueblo. And the day before the race, Fabian and his crew from Texas held a great event at the firehouse, which was miles down a gravel road with no running water, where VIPs and pros got to ride together, mingle, and enjoy some of Fabian's delicious cooking. After having raced a $12,000 carbon BMC the prior weekend at Belgian Waffle Ride, Utah, which had 36mm bars, it was a big change to go to a metal bike with metal rims and 44mm bars that flared to like 50 or 52 or something in the drops for Gravel Locos. I want to tell you about the bike and the hard and beautiful day that was Gravel Locos Pueblos, but first, help me out. Hit that subscribe button and also click the little bell icon so you'll be notified of all my new videos as they pop up. As with many gravel events, Gravel Locos had multiple distances on offer. Everything from the 30-mile Pequeña up to the 60, 100, and then the 150-mile banner event. Still feeling pretty smoked from Belgian Waffle Ride Utah the week before. Doing 100 miles with some 8,000 feet of climbing sounded like plenty to me. The 60, 100, and 150 distances all started together from downtown Pueblo on Main Street with a full police escort. That was cool to be able to roll out all together. It was probably the most tranquilo neutral rollout I've ever done. Sometimes the neutral rollouts, it's 30 miles an hour riders on the bumper of a car. This was quite the opposite. I think it was the first time the police in Pueblo had done a neutral rollout for a race. But it was a good time to chat with folks doing multiple distances before we hit the dirt roads south of Pueblo and headed up towards the mountains. Now this course had the full mix of elephants. Full mix of elephants. There were no elephants, but there was the full mix of elements on course. There was a bit of pavement both in town and some rural highway road. There was some mag chloride treated road, which, if you're not familiar with that, it's often runs smoother than pavement. It's like a heavy oil that goes down to tamp down the dust and can run very smooth. So there was some of that. Then there was a healthy amount of sand, which made for some fun snaking around. And then a large contingent of choppy washboard, which was most notable coming down the big climb of the day. The 100-mile was basically a lollipop that started at the top of the pop, big loop, and then a out and back leg that climbed up to nearly 10,000 feet. So that was probably like a 50-hour steady climb and then a 20 or so minute descent, and the washboard were most notable coming rattling back down that bad boy. As with so many gravel events, riders were thinking about how to optimize their equipment for the day. You could go full aero for the paved mag chloride stretches, especially the long headwind grind back in. We saw a few people with aero bars for that. Or you could optimize for the laterally descent. And I saw a few people with gravel suspension forks on their bikes, if not out and out mountain bikes. But of course, you could only ride one setup on the day, and my setup was the Litespeed Ultimate G2, which was just launched recently, and the stock Spinergy GX wheels. All in weighs about 20.5 pounds, a bit on the heavier side for gravel bikes, but not by any means the heaviest. You know, for instance, Trek's top end Checkpoint SLR with red ETAP axis, that is also a 20.5 pound bike. News with the G2 is things that are old are new again, designed with the interlocking seat stays wrapping around the seat tube up onto the top tube. The idea was to expand tire clearance and also to stiffen up the rear end. You know, titanium is smooth and forgiving, but not as efficient for hard accelerations as carbon. So could that design bring titanium on par with carbon? We'll see about that. For rubber, the tires were 38 mil Panaracer Gravel King SS. A bit of a story here. So this bike was built up for me for Steamboat Gravel. Originally Litespeed was planning to launch it right after Steamboat, but a couple things got sideways. One, there was a bit of delay on Litespeed's end as to when they would release it, and two, I screwed up in that in trying to change out the stem for a slightly longer one that would fit me. When I reinstalled the new stem and very carefully torqued down the stem bolts to spec, I also just pinched the living daylights out of the Di2 wire that it was tucked in the bottom notch of the stem. Ended up having to dismantle the entire bike to reroute the Di2 wiring. Long story short, didn't ride that bike at Steamboat, but had it ready to go for Pueblo. I appreciated the Ultegra compact crank that the Litespeed folks had put on there in thinking of Steamboat, and that it had a 50-34 chainring setup, and paired with an 11-34, that gives a nice big range of gearing. And for somebody like me who is a little bit on the heavier side than, say, like the skinny Alex Houses out there who can just fly up mountains without realizing that we're going up double-digit grades, I like to have a low gear. I also like to be able to pedal a bigger gear down said hills. So I very much appreciated having a 50-11 on one end and a 34-34 on the other. Built up like this with GRX Di2, the bike comes in at roughly $5,000. So a good, almost a third of what that BMC cost that I was just on last weekend. So I rode this bike quite a bit around my home here in Boulder, Colorado, on dirt roads and paved roads and a little bit of chill single track, just trying to get a feel for the bike. I did not really look at the course in Pueblo much beyond looking at the course profile and seeing like, oh, there's a big old honking climb right in the middle. So I just left on the 38 mil tires, and in retrospect, I wish I had gone a bit fatter just because the washboard was so rough. And as nice as titanium is, it doesn't erase miles and miles of washboard. So having a fatter tire with a little bit lower tire pressure would have been the right call for me. Bike's geometry felt good. Riding around by myself and then also in the bunch at Gravel Locos. It's got the progressive gravel race geometry. The top tube is a centimeter longer than a standard road bike or even the outgoing Litespeed Ultimate gravel bike. And the head tube is in the 71 to 72 degree range depending on size. That felt like it was confident enough without being squirrely like a road bike on the dirt. Saw mostly gravel bikes at Gravel Locos, a few mountain bikes. There was one man on a road bike. That would be pro roadie Gavin Mannion of Human Powered Health, and he was up there in the front group as you'd expect from a professional of that level. Unfortunately, he went down in the latter third of the race trying to follow Finsty around at high speed through those choppy dirt corners. So yes, you can ride a road bike on gravel, you can ride a mountain bike on gravel, but there's certainly something to be said for having an optimized tool for the job, even if you're a top-end professional. So how does that titanium feel? It's funny looking at the bike with its 30.9 seat post, 0 setback. It looks like it would be a pretty rigid ride, and if it was aluminum, it would be. But built of titanium, there is a bit of cush to it. I still felt like it was not as forgiving as a carbon bike that has a long carbon post designed to flex, such as like the giant Revolt for instance, or like this BMC Kayaks that I just came off of, both of which have the little D-shaped posts with a longer extension to them and designed to move a bit. So more comfortable than alloy? Absolutely. More comfortable than like a carbon race bike that's designed to be stiff? For sure. But more comfortable than a carbon gravel bike that's designed to be comfortable with a carbon seat post? No. Before the race even hit that big climb of the day, it broke into a few groups. I found myself in the second group and struggling in the second group. But one thing I like about gravel races, there's so many of us out there that after the sorting happens, you're all but certain to find yourself with at least one other person, if not 10 other people, and you can, just get in your groove and proceed from there. I was dropped again on the main climb of the day, just was not feeling the speed that the other boys and Emily Newsom were driving up front. So I just settled into my own tempo and really enjoyed the time. Well, of all the places to get dropped, this is a lovely place. Aspens are turning, fall is in the air. I'm no longer trying to go the pace of these fast folks up the mountain. There was an aid station at the top where I was happy to rejoin with some other folks. Topped off the bottles, had some snacks, traded some lame dad jokes, and then back down the descent we went. Those 44 bars, 44 on the top and 50 to 52 or something in the drops, were appreciated on the descent. As traction was an iffy situation sometimes as the bike bounced over the washboardy corners. Saw people with better bike handling skills than I slipping and sliding around a bit. I don't like the feel of my tire slide, so I was happy to put it in the back seat and take it a little more cautiously coming down. Those bars later on the day definitely felt wider than necessary when crawling back home towards Pueblo into a headwind for 20 or 30 miles. But again, you can't optimize for all the things. So let's talk about the titanium frame design, what they were trying to do. Some design elements I could feel, some I could not. For instance, the arrow-shaped tubing on the down tube. Could I feel that? No. Also, the head tube is just a straight up cylinder, so that to me doesn't look aero at all. I would not classify this as an aero gravel race bike. As for the enhanced stiffness, I also couldn't feel that. In fact, I feel like this bike feels like the older titanium bikes in that it is good and comfortable when pedaling along at a steady cadence, but when trying to accelerate, it feels a bit like trying to get a teenager out of bed, and that it is reluctant to come along initially. Some just basic checks I do on frames are the tactile tests. I've done laboratory tests with bikes over the years, measuring stiffness in a number of different ways, but there are some things you can just do with your hands or your feet. So just squeezing the rear triangles with my hands on this bike, you can see there's a fair amount of movement. Do the same with a carbon bike like this giant Revolt, and there's just less movement. Similarly, just pushing down on the pedal from the side of the bike, the bottom bracket swims around a little bit. That you get that movement on any bike for sure, but there's just more here with the titanium. So do these interlocking seat stays enhance the stiffness laterally compared to the outgoing one? Perhaps, but this bike still is not as stiff as a carbon gravel race bike. Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? That's a personal preference thing, I think. For me, I do like the feel of a stiffer carbon rear end when accelerating, so that is a bit of a downer from my perception. Alternatively, one can make the argument that, hey, in a gravel race, when you're out there for 5, 6, 8, 10 hours, super snappy accelerations are not the main thing. Just keeping it rolling and keeping your body comfortable are the primary objectives. But take that for what you will. Where I net out is that the bike isn't as stiff to accelerate as a carbon gravel race bike. So how about those Spinergy wheels? The GX gravel wheels with the PBO spokes. PBO meaning polyphenylene benzobisoxazole, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Their claim is that these fiber spokes are significantly lighter and also stiffer than steel. Could I feel that as in either direction? No. If anything, I'm quite spoiled with the lightweight of carbon rims. Most test bikes now come with carbon rims, and that rotational weight is certainly something that I believe you can feel. Like when you go from a bike with a 30 mil tire to something with a 50 mil tire, that extra rubber, you can absolutely feel that, especially the initial accelerations, whether you're just rolling away from a stop sign or you're trying to get up on terms with someone who just rode away from you. The spoke material, I could not feel one way or the other. The wheels weigh, claimed 1,475 grams. I put on a few other wheel sets just to see how much of that perception of sluggish acceleration was the wheels versus the frame, and I netted out that it was the frame more than the wheels. I tried it with Envy's AG25 wheels, which are like a 1,350 gram wheel set with a 330 gram rim. Again with the similar tire, similar total weight, and that flex in the rear triangle under those first few hard pedal strokes felt the same. Since Litespeed is building its bikes in Chattanooga, not only cutting and welding the frames, but also putting the parts on, you can have parts left off if you like, whether that's a saddle or the wheels or a group set. Litespeed will build it up the way you like, which is a cool thing. You can get custom geometry for an additional $1,200. They can also tweak the drillings on the thing. If you want top tube bolts, for instance, for your little bento bag, they can put that on. The same with the down tube, underneath the down tube mounts, you can have those added on at no additional cost. I'd recommend for a gravel bike having those top tube mounts. I like having a small little bag up there for snacks, and it certainly doesn't hurt to have mounts there if you're not using a bag. One little nit to pick, speaking of bottle cage mounts, the bottle cage mount on the seat tube sits up a little bit higher than I think is necessary. The nice thing is that it makes it easier to reach your bottle when riding along, but the problem is if you're trying to put on a frame bag, things get jammed up. Either you're using a small bottle and you're having to wrestle it out from under the bag, or you're limited in the type of bag you use. So kind of a small thing, but if you're wanting to use this bike for multiple things, including hauling around stuff in a frame bag, that mounting placement is annoying. Maybe just something to keep in mind if you are buying one of these bikes, to talk to the good folks at Litespeed about where you want that seat tube bottle cage placed. Speaking of carrying around snacks, whether in your top tube or elsewhere, there were plenty of stops at Gravel Locos. That's something that Fabian Serralta takes pride in. Since I was nowhere near the front of the race, I was happy to stop. Sometimes I go into races with my hydration vest on because I don't want to stop. I want to stay with the group as long as I possibly can. With this much climbing and the motors at the front of the race, I was in no danger of staying anywhere near the front, and was happy to stop and catch up with new riders to ride with, and then just chat with some of the folks who came out to volunteer at the aid stations. So the first edition of Gravel Locos Pueblo was a good one. It was a hard and diverse course with a lot of the gravel elements thrown in there. It was nice this time of year in the fall with the leaves changing and climbing up into the mountains, and it was cool to afterwards hear about the hitters going at each other, with Fensty taking the win over Lawrence Tindam and Flavia pulling off the W in the women's edition. Now, titanium is a very viable choice for gravel bikes. In addition to the feel of the material, it's also pretty hardy against rocks getting kicked up. Now, knock on wood, I have not had any carbon bikes shatter under me by rocks getting kicked up during events, but you do hear them pinging off the bike all the time in events, especially in the first 30 minutes to hour or so when it's still a huge group. So titanium, I think, offers peace of mind in terms of durability over the long haul. In my experience at Gravel Locos, the Litespeed Ultimate G2 was a comfortable ride and pretty efficient once up to speed, but that initial acceleration just felt a bit sluggish coming off of carbon race bikes. As always, if you've got questions, leave them down below and I will answer them as best as I can. Next up for me is Big Sugar down in Bentonville, Arkansas. That is the conclusion of the 6-race Lifetime Grand Prix series. I will be on yet another new bike that is launching just around that time frame, so be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, I thank you for watching and enjoy the ride. So Ted just passed me going downhill. I've still got, I don't know, miles to climb. Homeboy's already on the way back. It's like he's a bike racer or something. Yeah. Nicest thing. Got it.